doing his PhD at the Jawaharlal University. I think if you look at what we are studying, if you look at non-state, new stakeholders in Indian foreign policy, the views of a practitioner like him are very important, and especially in the context of, we can also, during the course of this talk, we do hope we also speak about the attitudes of the bureaucracy towards, the consultants in MEA, because this lateral entry has just started in India. So we will also, as you had said, Chatham House rules will apply. We will not quote you on that, but it would be interesting to hear about that. I may also add that his area of specialization otherwise is China. So he's looking at the Chinese economy, political developments over there in great detail. So I think in that sense his interests are quite eclectic and very much in sync with the interdisciplinary nature of our school in general, and this course in particular. We were looking at a gamut of issues, whether it's business, whether it's media, whether it's think tanks, and whether it's foreign policy. So without much ado, I request Manpreet to begin. We can have about, as we discussed, 40-45 minutes of your presentation and about 25 to 30 minutes to get.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manpreet Singh. I thank you, Tridivesh, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be back on campus. I'm coming back here after 3 years. I was here in 2015 March for a course brief competition. There was something that was going on then, and I was here with one of my friends who was studying here. So first of all, let me again make it clear, though this is under Chatham House rules, these are all my personal views and do not reflect any policy view of the government or the division, my employer whatsoever. So I'm a consultant with the Policy Planning and Research Division. I don't know if many of you have heard of it, but it's one of the foundational divisions of the ministry. It was set up in around 1953-55 around, and our former Foreign Secretary JSIA was also Joint Secretary in the policy planning. It's considered to be where the policy initiatives start. So it's right now one of the biggest divisions in the ministry, and we have very interdisciplinary sort of work plan there, where there are various consultants. I'll come to that later in terms of lateral entry, etc. But we have policy planning dialogues with various countries with their own policy planning divisions, and the benefit of it is basically that I get to work with people who are looking at economic diplomacy, West Asia, East Asia, Indian Ocean, America, etc., etc., etc. So I'll begin with the topic here first, and then we'll get to the Q&A, and we can be more informal as I go on. Informal discussion is much more better that way in a classroom, I believe so. So non-governmental players, how much of a major role they play in Indian foreign policy making. Now we have to distinguish how much we are talking about Indian foreign policy and American foreign policy, because our views are majorly sort of influenced by what we see and read on media, on Facebook, or through newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, and we try to sort of we try to understand, or we try to believe that as much influence that American think tanks have on their foreign policy, India also has, India is also being influenced similarly, but that is not so much. It's just think tanks we're talking about here. So at the non-governmental players play two major roles here, like in two ways. One is at the policy formulation stage, which is somewhat constructive in nature, and second is expanding or restricting the space for government to maneuver its foreign policy sort of domain. Now, beginning with an example would be like there are four main non-governmental players here: media, think tanks, business lobbying groups, and international NGOs. So let's begin with media now. So in terms of media, Times Now. I have been privy to a lot of conferences, seminars, closed door, etc., where I have heard foreign policy practitioners, former foreign secretaries, etc., speak on how, just an example of Times Now and how it sort of comes out on the daily 9 p.m. sort of a news hour against China, for example. So I study China, and there are at least 400 plus transgressions every year on the India-China border. At least 400 plus. Like starting from, if I just begin from 2013 onwards, Chumar, Depsang, Daulat Beg Oldi, and the most recently Doklam. Now, if we sort of go on about it over and over again, the impact it has on India-China foreign policy, India-China relations, we have to understand that there has to be a border, there has to be resolution of the border dispute at some point in time. But the way nationalism is going on through media, this is a way, we need to understand the role these media houses play. On the other hand, there's also some positive role. For example, Aman Ki Asha program. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. Aman Ki Asha was also started by the Times Group, the Times of India. Now, it was a sort of a track 2 dialogue sort of a situation where the journalists from this side went to that side and invited them over here for, in terms of Pakistan. The Aman Ki Asha program was vis-a-vis Pakistan. So this was one of the other things, in media how they play. The next example would be surgical strikes. Okay. So surgical strikes, it was not the first surgical strike that the government did, but it was very significant because it was announced at the highest level, publicly. Media took its advantage in terms of TRPs. The government took its advantage in terms of domestic political considerations, and is taking the advantage even now. So media's role here is very important to understand. It can play a very constructive role, it can play a very restrictive role, and it can sort of restrict the space for government to maneuver its foreign policy. Next would be, I'll come to the think tanks also later, next would be the business lobbying groups. Now, business lobbying groups, there's something called US-India Business Council, which hosts US-India Forum from the past 2 years, which is a closed-door forum where select business houses and policymakers are invited. So this is the way government, in terms of MEA or MOD or Commerce Ministry, Industry Ministry, etc., invite corporate houses and and have discussions on foreign policy. The next would be in terms of think tanks. So think tanks, there's track 1.5, track 2, ORF, RIS, ICRIER. So there are government-sponsored think tanks like IDSA, ICWA, which are MOD and MEA's think tanks going back 1950s. And then there are financed through governments, for example, RIS, ICRIER, etc. And there are private think tanks now, Brookings and Carnegie. So Brookings and Carnegie, there was one of the recent articles came out in January this year on terms of their financing and funding. So who is funding them? So it is required that we have meaningful participation, which is a good idea, but it should not come at the cost of India's national interests, because the funding is is in question here, right? So the government think tanks and private think tanks and these privately financed think tanks like ORF, etc. One of the things I can share with you in terms of that is ORF, the Raisina Dialogue held its 3rd edition this year in January. ORF raised around 9 crore rupees on its own. And it had funding from Facebook, Uber, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these companies. Now, if you follow all these companies and what products they make and what sort of, for example, if you just question what is Facebook doing in Raisina Dialogue. So they have Facebook Live. All right, they have Facebook Live, which is to reach people as much as possible. But what is Uber doing in Raisina Dialogue? Or imagine Lockheed Martin sponsoring a session on Indo-Pacific, which was one of the undercurrent themes of which was one of the undercurrent themes of the Raisina Dialogue this year. So Lockheed Martin or Boeing and Uber, Facebook, etc. Another very important sort of you will understand is the track 1.5 dialogues, which the government holds every year. N number of track 1.5 dialogues and track 2 dialogues. So track 2 dialogues are the ones where academic practitioners and academicians, think tank people go across to to each other's think tanks every year. 1.5 is where there are government officials are also present. NMF is, I used to work at NMF for 4-5 months. It's a think tank of Indian Navy here, National Maritime Foundation. So they hold a bilateral dialogue with CNA, Center for Naval Analysis, which is US Navy's think tank. It's a track 1.5 dialogue, and that was when I understood the kind of signaling and messaging that takes place. We recently signed COMCASA with the US government just yesterday, all right? And in one of the bilateral dialogues which I was present in track 1.5, the way the presentations like these are made and the way signaling is done in terms of what does India require, what does US expect of India to sort of give concessions, like what concessions should we give so that US would agree on that. And these reports are sent upwards to the respective governments. And then a decision is taken and the back channel talks happen, and then they come to the final text of the agreement and start negotiating on it. So these track 1.5 dialogues give a clue, like for example, India-Pakistan context, like in the India-Pakistan context, there's a Chayopriya dialogue which happens in Bangkok. And then there's Herat dialogue in context of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India trilateral, which happens in Afghanistan. And Manama dialogue, etc. That is held by IISS London probably. And then there's Shangri-La, Munich, etc. All these sort of, these are all track 1.5 in one way, but on the sidelines of it are where the major thinking and negotiating and back channeling happens. All right. So the last is international NGOs. In terms of international NGOs, how many of you have heard of Jetapur or Kudanarkulam? Jetapur nuclear power plant in Maharashtra, Kudanarkulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu. Or the recent Sterlite protests in Tamil Nadu, Sterlite copper protests, all right? Or obviously the 2008 nuclear deal. So how international NGOs sort of play a role in foreign policy is very interesting to see. Much more so in the context of the current government, again under Chatham House rules. FCRA licenses of hundreds of NGOs were cancelled in 2014 when the government came in. UNICEF, etc., and major UNDP and other NGOs, except imagine if UN's funding and UNICEF's funding is getting dry in India, imagine what's happening to the non-famous sort of NGOs in India. So it's very important how government is sort of, in a way, tackling the menace of international NGOs and the role they play in foreign policy making. In Kudanarkulam, it is a joint project with Russia. Jetapur is a joint project with France. All right. So international NGOs in foreign policy can legitimize a policy decision through public opinion, or can sort of sway it against the government's decision. And the very recent examples would be Amnesty in Kashmir, Amnesty International's Kashmir, and the UN Commission for Kashmir was also shut down by this government. It made them close their shop. And Human Rights Watch. One of the recent examples, the more recent would be Rohingya issue, Rohingya refugees, or the National Registry in Assam. Now, it's much more a domestic sort of issue for us, but it has implications on the Bangladesh relations with India. And on that, the government had, on its own, had back-channel talks with the Bangladesh government and informed them that there will be no deportation. Now, look at the interplay here. On one side, the government here is saying that we'll deport the illegal migrants from India. On the other side, back-channel, like through the back-channel, they've already said there'll be no deportations. So it's being done purely for political purposes. Same for surgical strikes, done only for political purposes. It had happened in 2007, happened in 2013, again happened in 2016. But the government had to announce it because it had faced major setbacks in Pathankot, Uri, etc. All right. Okay. 2008 nuclear deal, international NGOs. Yeah. So the 2008 nuclear deal. The interesting thing is nuclear liability law has not yet been passed. All right, and the reason is Fukushima, and again international NGOs there. So how these international NGOs are funded? Greenpeace, for example, the Environmental Ministry, Greenpeace, Amnesty. All right, WHO. Now WHO recently supported Modi government's Swachh Bharat program. Like it sort of applauded and commended it, that has saved millions of lives here. So the government, when it suits the government, it sort of takes on their comments, and when it doesn't, it sort of rejects them, that they are being funded here and there, etc., etc. Now, in terms of lateral entry, and recently it was announced that the government will take 10 joint secretaries across divisions, though MEA is not part of it. The Ministry of External Affairs is not part of it. But it will take 10 joint secretaries above the age of 40 with certain, etc., sort of eligibility criteria and all. And at our stage, at the stage of like around young consultants, etc., this program was started in 2015. And right now there are around 30, 40 consultants in the ministry who are working across divisions, not the sensitive ones like East Asia or Pakistan, Afghanistan division, but they're working across various divisions like economic diplomacy, Southern division, Indian Ocean, policy planning. There's a China center where there are, again, various consultants have been hired there. And it's a wonderful opportunity. Very honestly, I've been working there for 1.5 years. It's a wonderful opportunity because it gives you an insight on how the government thinks, how the system functions, and how outside we perceive that it's not going anywhere and who's deciding it, and like, we are doomed and nothing can happen, we can't do anything. But there's a certain way the system has been made, and there's a certain way it moves along. And the government thinking, or the insight that I perceived, is that it's very slow, but it gets the work done somehow. Being very honest here. All right, I just began 1.5 years back, but in 1.5 years I can just tell you it's very slow. It sort of frustrates you in the beginning and frustrates you and tells you, okay, like, why are we here and what are we doing and who's thinking and who's writing and who's actually making policy. You can like sitting outside, like when I was at that side of the desk here, I was like, who's making policy? Can I just know? Or is there one particular body like National Security Council Secretariat or MEA or the Cabinet Committee on Security, for example? Or why is there no national security doctrine or a white paper? All right, but that's the way the system is made, that there'll be ambiguity, that there'll be no clear sort of a way on who's making it. But there'll be certain leading groups, committees, small committees, subcommittees, drafting committees, who will keep working on it, who will keep, like, the members there keep changing. So the more you think, okay, why can't be like one person have a specialization? The whole debate in terms of at least UPSC is generalists and specialists. Okay, so why can't we have specialists? But the belief is, and what I have been also privy to discussions and what I've been also told is that because you have to work in various sectors and various positions all your life, so it's better to have generalists there who can sort of talk about Africa at one point, Latin America in another, Russia, great powers, UN, multilateral economic diplomacy, climate change, etc. So, and then there's deputational systems. So where people from other ministries come to MEA people go outside. And consultants are, so basically we have research papers, we have policy briefs. I have written a few speeches, I have written policy briefs and research papers on China and Australia, America, nuclear deals, North Korea. So it's very interesting in terms of the, because when you get feedbacks from the people who are actually practicing that, like, that policy and have been ambassadors there or have been posted there in those countries and are privy to documents and conversations that you're not. So it sort of helps you out there. It helps you in validating your views or understanding how to think and analyze certain positions. So in terms of lateral entry, I would say that it's, at least as of now, it's going on, and I hope that it continues at our stage. And any of you people, you're probably, like most of you are in masters, I believe. So if it comes out next, please do apply. There's one person from Jindal in one of my, like in my division, I know, Vinay Bhushan. I don't know if any of you know of him. Probably one like much senior to you, and he was in Jindal School of he was in Jindal School of International Affairs, and he did his MPhil after that from JNU, and so that's about it, I believe, in terms of consultancy and lateral entry. Now, if you want, I can sort of talk on China if anyone's interested.
Yeah, I think you can expand.
Expand on China that way. Okay, so do you have specializations here in terms of China, like certain electives or something? I don't know. I've not followed this course structure. You do? Like not in bachelor's and masters for sure.
Masters are there.
We have certain electives.
Electives that way. Okay, so why is India not part of BRI?
CPEC is the
That's just one reason.
one.
And CPEC is one of the corridors. CPEC is not the reason. Yeah.
Part P only. The issues of sovereignty related to the BRI
Sovereignty.
initiative, saying that would sort of undermine India's territorial integrity over Pakistan occupied Kashmir.
Okay. Sovereignty. Next, anyone else? All right. So there's a statement by the MEA on May 13, 2017, when the Belt and Road Forum began in Beijing. India was the only major power which did not participate in the Belt and Road Forum. There are four main reasons here. The most important is the sovereignty issue in terms of CPEC and the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which is a territory, which is India's territory, not claimed by India, which is India's territory. If you're an Indian, you have to say that it's in Indian territory and not claimed by India. All right. Next is the debt unsustainability issues. India has concerns that the projects under BRI raise the debt of certain countries to unsustainable levels. For example, Sri Lanka, Hambantota Port. For example, Malaysia recently cancelled $25 billion worth of projects, East Coast Rail Link, etc. Example, Myanmar, Gwadar, Djibouti, Pacific Islands. All right? Debt unsustainability is the second reason. Third is consensus. So India has no issues in terms of being a member of a China-led initiative. We are already members of two China-led initiatives, AIIB and NDB. All right? So India has no problem being a member of China-led initiative, but it has to be consensus-based. And BRI is just an amalgamation of various projects of China under one name. There are projects which began in 2003, 2007, 1990s, and BRI as a name came up only in 15. It started off as One Belt, One Road in 2013, but it began BRI only in 2015. So this is the third reason. Now the fourth reason is the geostrategic and geoeconomic implications of the BRI. The environmental concerns, the ecological concerns, the domestic political concerns. These are the 3-4 reasons that India is not part of BRI. Now, should India be a part of BRI in some capacity?
India does stand to be alienated, unfortunately, in the realm of connectivity and investment if it doesn't. However, in my personal opinion, I would say that owing to security interests and national interests and over the issue of sovereignty, it would be.
We have no option.
Unless there is a way that the BRI could happen without it passing through our territory, which wouldn't. But yeah, India does stand to lose a lot of investment, capital, resources, energy interests, etc. by not being part of it.
Okay, so is there an agreement that you signed to be part of BRI?
I don't think
So
so.
India can still invest in areas that they feel that that work towards their interests. It's like the United States. The United States will invest in certain areas where the BRI passes through, which add value to their whole investment play. You don't need to be a signatory or any board or anything like that. Obviously, they can't champion the cause because of territorial and sovereignty issues, but no one stops us from reaping the benefits of that infrastructure, like how China in fact reaped a lot of benefits in the Middle East as well as Africa through American investments. We can do the same through the Belt and Road Initiative.
all right.
BRI being like China's big initiative, and the question was written whether India will be part of that initiative, including Japan, Australia, and America.
The $300 million initiative.
Yeah, exactly. The statement when that came was that India isn't specifically excluded. Statement didn't come out whether we are actually a part of that or not. So I think the question now is whether they'll be a part of the initiative that opposes BRI in fact.
All right. I'll start with you. You said in terms of India like not signing on, and we can we sign on? So there's SAARC, there's BIMSTEC, and there's BCIM. Now, what is the difference between a mechanism and organization, in like a regional organization or just a mechanism and a group, like BRICS and SAARC or BIMSTEC?
The issue of over-compliance?
No, Secretariat. You need to have a headquarters. So BRICS, is there a BRICS headquarters? No. There's a SAARC headquarters, there's a BIMSTEC headquarters, all right? There's no BCIM headquarters. BCIM is a connectivity project. So can we be part of BRI under BCIM? Yes. BCIM is Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, right? So we can be part of BRI under that because it's negotiated from the beginning. It's negotiated from the beginning. We have a consensus on the rules and regulations, the terms of reference, and under what sort of agreement, under what clause will we get investments from China. And in terms of what we can get investments from China, not under we stand to lose and we stand to alienate, not so much. Not so much because we don't sign up to BRI. We sign up to bilateral agreements. So when Xi Jinping visited India in September 2014, he promised $20 billion of investment. Only $1.5 billion has come in the last 4 years, or it's September again. And he came around Modi's birthday, so yeah, around 17 September or something. So we don't stand to alienate ourselves or lose in terms of investment or infrastructure because we have BCIM. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I didn't say we were going to lose as well. My thing is that because China is going to invest so heavily into infrastructure in different areas, we can reap the benefits of their investment.
Yeah, but why signing up to BRI?
No, we don't need to sign up.
We don't need to sign up. Yeah. So then how do you get investments?
You don't get investments, but then...
I think what he means to say is that under the rubric of, without being under the rubric of BRI,
yeah.
right? As you said, the BCM corridor.
BCIM,
so incidentally, there has been a difference over that also because the Chinese said even BCIM is part of
BRI.
the BRI,
yeah.
since 20 years. But there are a number of other projects, and not just the BCIM part. Even if you look at if India has to cooperate with China and Afghanistan, you're ultimately giving legitimacy. See, the CPEC project is going to Afghanistan as well.
Yeah.
So if you're going to look at doing a joint capacity development project there,
Afghanistan,
right?
Yeah.
And if in China you're doing many other things also which are not directly under BRI or whatever, but they're related to them. So I think, and in fact, I'd also like to correct this thing about Japan is already, Japanese companies are investing in BRI.
Yeah.
So actually that is the pragmatic approach.
Like no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent
so
interests.
And also we should ask ourselves, while it's right that we have to have a stand on CPEC, passing through disputed territory, but can we wait for that forever? How you need to think in diplomacy sometimes, you need to think of deal making. So you can tell the Chinese that you won't, for instance, publicly you may make noises, but you won't make that a sticking point. And in return, you can try and get that from them. So there shouldn't be any rigidities over a period of time. What you can't stop beyond a point, you cannot stop. So that right now makes for good optics to say that there must be other issues as well. Right? So you have to weigh the pros and cons in a more nuanced.
India is not part of the Japan, Australia and US initiative is because India does not want to be seen as sort of containing China. Now the important thing to understand is we are the only country sharing a land border. So we are the one who will be who will face the implications or consequences of it the most. So when it's about the quadrilateral dialogue, or when it's about the quadrilateral dialogue and Malabar exercises, etc. So we're already doing certain things in terms of showing China that, or COMCASA, the most recent one, NSG, they just supported in yesterday's media briefing, they supported India's stand on NSG yet again, under Trump for the first time in the past 1.5 years. So we're already part of the initiative of sort of counterbalancing, is very academic term that way. So we're counterbalancing China already. We don't need to contain China. There's a difference between that. And if you get to the point, if you get in the category of containing China, then you lose on the investments, you lose on the opportunities, infrastructure that we can get. China wants to invest. China wants to invest, but we want it under our terms. For example, the highest amount of loans under AIIB have went to India. Under AIIB. Now it's a China-led initiative with headquarters in China, all right? But the largest amount of loans have come to us. So it's the sort of thing that you have to, like, it's very nuanced that way to understand it. It cannot be very, let's not make very generalistic statements. We are prone to making generalistic statements. Let's not make generalistic statements, very, sweeping statements on that.
In fact, China wants to be part of TAPI also.
Yeah.
Of late, China has been strict in TAPI.
Yeah.
And we have been part of the groundbreaking over there as well last year.
True.
So we're not in, we're not out, but we're not out certainly, I would say. So if China becomes part of TAPI also in some form, automatically TAPI comes under the rubric of CPEC. So there are a number of areas. Once China gets involved in Afghanistan, and if you are going to cooperate with China, which is likely, in fact,
which you have to, which you have to.
Today only, I think yesterday.
They'll train in Afghanistan. Yeah, they'll train in
Then
Afghanistan.
the whole game changes in the Western border.
I have a question about AIIB. Considering the fact that we are the receivers of the largest amount of funds, etc.
Loans.
So, would AIIB potentially fund an infrastructure project that India wishes to embark upon that may sort of not contain China? Like if India was essentially not, single pearl is a very huge strategy, but if India was supposed to maybe try and construct some infrastructure in Djibouti, for example, or in Philippines, etc., somewhere in that, and that would look, that at least in like that part of Southeast Asia, it would be looked at as India probably trying to encircle some part of the South China Sea or trying to have eyes on the South China Sea. In that case, would the AIIB be ready to loan India that those funds? Considering that.
So the mechanism under which these things work is that the loans from AIIB will be used for domestic purposes. The loans or the money, concessional loan, grants, etc., for building or sort of having a cooperative project in a third country, would be taken through ADB, or Indian companies would get contracts. The money will be from ADB or World Bank, etc. But AIIB, as of now, is not funding anything. I don't think China will allow that because they have large number of voting rights there in AIIB. Like we also have voting rights.
The loans are given for developmental purposes only, right?
Yeah,
so
loans only for
most of the projects that India got are in Andhra and Telangana. It's because they're building the state.
Sorry?
They're building the state right now. So it's only for developmental purposes that the bank is being used to grant loans, not for even personal or private projects. It's only, right now, as of now, it's only limited to developmental programs.
And in any case, India will not do anything that way. However much we may try
No, I was
to.
thinking the nuance, but of course, no, it will
That
be
you
back
don't
China.
see. Every country should also know its capabilities or whatever. So if the US backs you or somebody else actually backs you to the hilt, nobody is going to come to back you to the hilt on such a thing. If you do it in a nuanced way, maybe yes. But see, the US will also back you. That is why we are very nuanced. On certain issues, we have clear dissonance with the US also, but it doesn't come out. And we have more convergence with China. Right?
Yeah.
So whether it's economic issues, trade, even though they're
In terms of global governance issues, we are much in position with, we are much in tandem with China that way. Like we want more democratization of global governance. We want more power and position in not WTO, World Bank, IMF, UN. UN is one place where China would not support us. Climate change is one place where we will support China. But China sort of, if you want to say, backstabbed us with the 2013 November deal with Obama. So that's the sort of thing. So you take care of your interests. Very realistic, like very realist sort of a view of it. But
Like India came in support of North Korea also, which was, it did make a statement.
it's like supporting North Korea.
No, not supporting when the whole crisis was happening, when the whole Twitter war was happening, and how USA was, this is before the negotiations started for
not supporting North Korea
Not
in any way.
supporting, but
Yeah.
supporting their right to sort of.
No, the statement, like the statement is very diplomatic in that way that you, there should be peaceful negotiation, work out the problem, etc. On those lines only. On those lines only. Like we should have negotiate and come out with a solution rather than sort of go bomb blast about it, everything. That way. Okay. You have a question?
So what is, I mean, basically, you're on one hand you're doing academic research on China,
Yeah.
and on the other you're part obviously of this, the MBA and all that. What is the gap in terms of thinking? Because, often this argument is made that unlike the US, there is a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas because of more interaction, between the diplomatic corps and think tanks and universities.
Academia.
That is not the case over here. Very rarely now. So how much, I mean, are there any specific issues, for instance, on economic issues, do you see more of a gap? On strategic issues, do you see more of a change, differing mindset? Or pretty much everything,
In terms of diplomatic corps and academia and think tanks, I would say if, even though we perceive sitting on this side of the desk that the diplomatic corps is not sort of well versed with the academic lingo or what's happening in terms of theories or what's happening in terms of thinking in academia and research, it's not true that much. But a caveat here would be that the amount of interactions I have had personally are with the people who are in policy planning division. So the policy planning division is where the thinking and research is supposed to happen. In territorial divisions, it's firefighting every day. So there's some issue or the other happening with the Myanmar division, with Maldives, with Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Indian Ocean. Some or the other thing crops up and there they are firefighting with each day. In the policy planning division, it's slightly laid back where you get time to sit back and think and research. What are the gaps and what are the amount of interactions? The amount of interactions has increased much more within this government now. Within this government with initiatives like Raisina, Delhi Dialogue. Now, Delhi Dialogue is the 10 Southeast Asian countries with RIS and NMF and 2-3 think tanks plus MEA. And yeah. So Delhi Dialogue earlier was the first one was hosted by ICWA. Then it has now gone to, then it went to ICRIER also, now it's with RIS. So they keep shifting this thing. And then they started with India-China Think Tank Forum also in December 16, the first one. The second was in Beijing in June 17. I've not heard anything about the third one yet. So I don't think
that
that's...
coincides with the expo
Yeah,
Kunming.
at Kunming,
South Asian Expo.
Yeah, South Asian Expo that way. So the amount of interactions has increased. The practitioners don't get so much time to read per se about academic journals or anything, but because of so many track 1.5 and conferences, they are well versed with the lingo that we use here. Now, Shashi Tharoor he wrote a book, Pax Indica, and we were reading one of the chapters I was reading recently, and he came up and one of the paragraphs is he mentions how there's a dissonance what you raised recently in a question. There's a dissonance of from academia to practitioners. Academia is its own silos. Practitioners don't want to hear anything. So yes, there's an old school within the bureaucracy, within the establishment, which does not want to change. So when I say that, hopefully when you graduate and there's a consultancy position coming as of now, in quotes as of now. So because there's a pushback also. So there's a pushback within the government where they believe that we don't need anyone from outside. We are well versed. We are enough. We can do enough. But there's a new thinking where the American revolving door system, where Kissinger could be a professor and become a national security advisor and then a secretary of state and go back being a professor. I don't see it happening for the next 10 years at least, very honestly. To become a national security advisor from academia, not so easy. Probably a deputy national security advisor
Yeah, deputy NSC. That is
that's
one of C. Rajamohan's biggest regrets.
That way. Any other questions, please?
And what about we know much more about the American system where how the government is interacting how does it work because the Chinese are trying to project a very different sort of perspective in terms of the think tanks and the universities and all. You know, some of their universities are doing reasonably well. Like
Tsinghua, Futan, Tsinghua, Futan,
So what is, and see, basically we know that behind the scenes everything is run by the Communist Party or by the state. But to what extent is there a cross-fertilization there of ideas from academia to, the...
Like the ministry there, like or the system in China.
Yeah.
In China, because there's a one-party system, it's a one-party state, and each, like a communist party in any state, be it Soviet Union, Cuba, like Vietnam, or Venezuela, or even India for that matter, would have and would want to have like representation in each aspect of society. So there's a teachers union, there's a trade union, there's a laborers union, there's a union in everywhere, like in every aspect of society in a communist state. So in China, they're placing people even in sort of joint ventures with the foreign companies. So state-owned enterprises or private companies in China with joint ventures with foreign companies are also supposed to have a Communist Party representative or a political commissar. It's called a political commissar in the Communist Party lingo that way, within the company. So with these kind of sort of representation, they are allowed to, or they sort of pass on the message from the top to the bottom, or to the through the hierarchy on what's supposed to be done and what ideas sort of have to reach up. Now, the pitfall of such a system is that the true story doesn't reach the top. What's happening on the ground doesn't reach the top, like what happened during Mao's Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap Forward. Like the amount of production in steel or food didn't reach the top. They fudged the data. Same's happening again. The house, like the whole bubble in China, which is being talked about, is because they are scared that the true story of what's happening on the ground is not reaching the top. So there's a synergy which helps them, but there's also a pitfall, like there's a backslide of it also. Like how we think that we are lagging behind, but in some way or the other, our monitoring and evaluation mechanisms in India are somewhat true. Like 95% or 98% are true that way. So we lag behind, we know that we lag behind. But whether they are lagging behind or they are doing good, their GDP figures, no one trusts them. Their figures on defense expenditure, no one trusts them. So stuff like that.
One question about business lobbying. I think a lot of us wonder how it's done. If you just shed some light on functioning.
Okay, so FICCI, CII, and one of the NASCOM, ASCOM, etc., or US-India Business Council, Israel, all right. So these lobbying groups in terms of India, it's very vague. It's very fuzzy that way. Like it's not, they obscure it because there aren't proper laws in India to monitor them. But the same in America, like the same in US on how they function in terms of political action committees or lobbying groups, or IPAC, like the America-Israel Political Action Committee, it's very clear. In India, it happens like the amount of money they funnel through, again, elections, corruption, like the whole election machinery for 2014, how it was funded, or for 2019, how it will be funded. It happens through that. And then they influence, and that's how policy decisions are influenced. So if you think that corruption has reduced and there's no corruption, it's not true. There's no retail corruption. There's no retail corruption. So Rafael might not be a scam. Rafael might not be a scam. But the company you choose to sort of get the agreement with the French government or with the French manufacturer, that's how you influence policy, and that's how you get sort of your money back through the system. Yep. Anything else? Yeah, please.
Is there any way for how do people get into business lobbying? Is it because a couple of us in our masters, we actually do sit and talk about this, and nobody it's very vague. It's almost like they've designed it to be this gray, as in
So see, like CII and FICCI are very open organizations. They are very open organizations, but not like most of the lobbying does not happen through them. All right, most of the lobbying happens directly, or through middlemen which we do not know exist, or which we know exist but no one talks about, like which no one which no one wants to talk about. Like all these defense contracts, etc., how it used to happen and how it still happens. It's through that. So, yeah.
So does your division also interact with the sections of the business community or media? I know think tanks obviously because of events like JSIA.
Events and everything, yeah.
But otherwise beyond that, gets a certain inputs and all.
Beyond that, in institutional capacity, the division does not, because in the institutional mandate for the division is to fund events and conferences and certain programs in universities, for example. So in terms of how India is functioning in universities and in MEA, what's the synergy there or what's the mechanism on how? So MEA started this thing called SAMEEP program. It just came out last year. So where Indian foreign policy practitioners and IFS officers, they go back to their hometowns or they're allotted certain districts, etc., universities, where they go and talk to students, and they inform them on how foreign policy is made, and how they practice foreign policy, etc., and how to get into foreign policy. For example, they talk to bachelor's and master's students. So this is a way of sort of outreach program. It's called SAMEEP, so in Hindi, so it's outreach program, by the ministry. But the division in its capacity, in institutional capacity at least, it does not. In personal capacity, certain, I would say, certain visionary officers that way who have, they want to they want to connect with people and get to know what's the thing happening outside, they do. And that's how it's supposed to be done. You cannot be closeted in your own space in the ministry or in the bureaucracy. The moment you become closeted, you don't move forward. It's supposed to be like that. Any question on China or other non-governmental think tanks, etc.? Most of you want to.
So it is true that India does not have lobbying laws as of now. But don't you think that India right now is using the diaspora to lobby not in our country, but the relations we want to have with a particular country, but they're lobbying directly in that country? So for example, if you look at our recent relations with the United States, Canada, even Australia, the diaspora has become very active, and that you have a lot of diaspora over there that have been divided into groups like political affiliations, then corporations. Even though we aren't letting them influence what our foreign policy is, but aren't they influencing that own country when it comes to India relations with, for example, Australia? So even though we aren't letting the diaspora have a direct impact on our foreign policy, but it is indirectly happening, right? So how does the government regulate that? Does the government actually make their viewpoint, do the government actually make it clear what their viewpoint is, or are they doing it for their own exterior benefits which are appreciated and accepted by both the governments? How does that work?
So the government would not be able to regulate them, point one, because it's not our jurisdiction. It's not our jurisdiction. Secondly, the government does not do it. The government in its official capacity never lobbies diaspora or never sort of imposes or influences diaspora to do lobbying. Not in institutional and official capacity. The ruling party, however, in its capacity, influences diaspora to sort of ask for certain concessions for India. The best example of it is known as the 2008 nuclear deal. It's the best example of how diaspora, Indian diaspora, which settled from 1900s onwards and got into political positions and made a lot of money, could influence senators across the Republican and the Democratic Party to support the 123 deal. All right. Or the most recently would be the the major defense partner or DIPP in terms of US, for example, Australia, Canada. So the ruling party right now, the current ruling party or the opposition party, both the BJP and the Congress have their offshoots, overseas friends of BJP, for example. All right, or through RSS, or the Congress has its own liberal Congress, something they call it that way in US. So they can influence and they can sort of lobby these groups where when the Prime Minister, for example, he goes, this government made diaspora a very focal point of its foreign policy. Before that, it wasn't such a important issue. All right, and it's good in a way, but the example that you should be understanding and we should all focus is, how many of you heard of Confucius Institutes? Okay, so why don't we have Confucius Institutes in India? Confucius, there are around 400 plus Confucius Institutes in the world. There was supposed to be one in JNU. Yeah, there was supposed to be one. They had already signed an MOU, but the government scuttled it. So Confucius Institutes are like China's outreach programs, like American Center, British Council, etc. in India, in Delhi. It's the similar one. So why aren't we having those kind of things from China in India? All right. So this is how China uses its diaspora, the influence and interference politics of China. Now, Indian government, because Indian government is not a monolithic, homogeneous system, or Indian state is not a monolithic, homogeneous system, where we can influence or lobby our diaspora to get what we want for our foreign policy objectives. But the Chinese government is being able to do it, because it is a single monolithic, homogeneous system, establishment, all right, where they coerce. There's a carrot and stick approach that if you do not do this, so for example, you're living in Australia. I recently did a paper on China-Australia relations. So we're living in Australia, and you have family back home in China. So the Communist Party or the MSS, they're like the intelligence agency. It will coerce you into doing something if you do not agree. So first they'll offer you a carrot. If not, then they'll offer you a stick. So you'll have to agree in sort of lobbying and forcing what they're what they're asking you to do. So Indian government does not do it. That's the thing. And is there anything wrong in it? Not so much. Not so much. Like if it's about your foreign policy objectives, but because India as a like Indians as culture, like as a cultural identity of Indians, we are able to assimilate ourselves in different cultures. So we do not sort of form our group and go against the culture of the land we're settling in. So it's not much of a problem for Indians that way.
I think I would just like to qualify that. There are 2-3 things. I think we discussed this even in the class. There are 3 or 4 issues in it. The first is, even on the nuclear deal and all, it was nothing institutionalized per se. In fact, one of the differences even to India and Pakistan, for instance, for very long has been hiring lobbying firms in Washington. We've never needed them because that's how things work. Like it works in a very organic fashion. Secondly, when you talk about interference, see if it's an Indo-US nuclear deal, it's not an internal issue only; it's a foreign policy issue. And there is the support of it. India, it's the diaspora alone cannot do it. There's naturally support for it in the US itself.
Organically.
There's a caucus over there.
Yeah.
And otherwise, the diaspora had to do things they were doing even 40 years ago. So there's a caucus backing this issue, right? And there's great support for it, and there's some resonance. Otherwise, you cannot do it in a an organized manner or whatever. So this is very different from intervening in the domestic politics of the US. That would be influencing the election or whatever. But I may also add that certain countries are very sensitive to Mr. Modi's outreach. For instance, when he went to Singapore, before any Indians had to go for his rally out thing, they had to take permission. At least those were Singaporean citizens, right? So there is, as we had discussed earlier also, I think there's a very thin line between bilateral relationship is one thing, but when you start treading on the toes of for instance, if we start looking at what is happening in the general elections in the midterms, and we start influencing either the Democrats or the Republicans, that is very stupid in terms of diplomacy. You should leave that alone. You obviously have everybody has their own preferences, but at the end of the day, there's a difference between the and also that obviously there is some there's a momentum that is when the diaspora has jumped in. So even now it's not institutionalized. For the nuclear deal, for instance, with Sanjay Chatwal or 2-3 other people who intervened, they have their own links with Hillary Clinton, with Bill Clinton or whatever. So they did it. See, nobody does anything out. Let's be very clear about one thing. Nobody is doing anything out of any love lost for the other, including the diaspora for India.
So if I may, sir, look at how the United States has gradually reduced its military aid, and there have been senators that have openly asked Pakistan to be termed as a terrorist state officially. Now they didn't do that before the groups that supported the BJP over there. Now they are the major ones who are pushing for Pakistan to be given this status and gradually be cut off their aid. Now that is sort of influencing their domestic policy, right? It's not a foreign issue.
It's very different. It's very different. So you're like, see, let's deconstruct it. US is cutting aid to Pakistan, purely foreign policy. All right, who's influencing the US decision? All right, this is this is intersectional in that way. All right, and whether it's whether it's Pakistan influencing domestic lobbying or Indian the Indian diaspora influencing the lawmakers there, or the Indian foreign policy establishment itself, the Indian government influencing, or like he said earlier, there's a resonance. There's a geostrategic and geopolitical changes is in the air which is forcing or which is sort of coercing the lawmakers also to change their stance on Pakistan. All right. So when it happened with nuclear deal, because the US realized that now it is time to support India. We did our nuclear test in 1998. All right. There were sanctions. Bill Clinton visited in March 2000. All right. From then on till 2005, there's an upswing. All right, across governments, from Bill Clinton to Bush, from Vajpayee to Manmohan Singh. All right, from 2000 2008 exactly. So there was a need for it. Like the need was felt within the US establishment. The US deep state, which Trump calls the deep state, basically. So there's a Democratic caucus, Republican caucus, there's an India caucus, bipartisan India caucus, which supports labeling India as a major defense partner. Now, when we became major defense partner, we get access to 90% of US technology, arms technology. All right. So when US cuts aid to Pakistan, it's not the Indian domestic or the BJP or any other party any of the political parties group which are lobbying the US government and it's happening. It is a part of it. I would say again, very minuscule part of it. Majorly, it would be done by the foreign policy establishment, by the Indian embassy there, by the talks we are having in terms of 2+2, like how the Secretary of Defense went to Pakistan only for a couple of hours. So this thing is always there. Whoever comes to India visits Pakistan. Whoever goes to China visits Japan, or visits Philippines, or one of theirs.
If that were the case, the diaspora is so effective, then even on other issues like H1B issues,
H1B,
so there is a certain logic. There is a certain situation, right? So even today, for instance, just hypothetically, in 3 months, suppose Pakistan were to deliver something in terms of whether this negotiations with the Taliban or something. Nothing is static. It's to assume that there's one lobby just sitting there and watching out. Okay, it adds up, right? But even with the US, even with Pakistan, it's taken very long, and it also has to do with Trump's transactionalism. I don't think there's that much. As far as Trump is concerned, it's a political decision about America first and reducing money. Of course, then there are people like Pompeo and all who can go in the nuanced manner. The lobbies definitely they can give the last final push. But had that been the case, then even on things like as I said on H1B, so many other issues, even issues of trade and all, there's still problems. So it's a mixed bag actually.
Trade is a major issue. We have around 20 plus cases against US and WTO, or climate change for that matter. So there are issues which affect Indian foreign policy objectives but are not resolved through lobbying or diaspora, which are resolved only through negotiations over a period of time where the US
or the political leadership of the time takes a decision and says okay.
Yeah.
There's lesser of an urgency then with those
In terms of?
the fact that some can be drawn on over a long period of time through the WTO or through bilateral relations.
Yeah, because if there are issues which cannot be resolved in a flick of a finger that way, then they have a drawn-on negotiation tactic. So, and it's also again a tactic. If there's a political decision being made at the highest level, no, that we need it. For example, Wuhan summit. Now, the informal summit at Wuhan was a political decision made at the highest level by Xi Jinping and PM Modi, that we have to sort of calm down and cool down and de-escalate the tensions. Because it was believed that Doklam happened without the knowledge of Xi Jinping at the highest level. So the local commanders there, because if it's not a meritocratic system in the PLA, and if it's corruption based, and if it's if there's a lot of lobbying again and political lobbying happening within the PLA, then there are sort of commanders at the local level who would want to show that, okay, we are able to do this and we are able to do that and we are able to go and infiltrate and get certain things from the sort of objective or the limited objective they had was to go and capture the territory and and not retreat. They did not expect Indian troops based in Bhutan, the 5,000 Indian troops based in Bhutan to sort of come up and have a showdown.
Was it true that Xi Jinping did not actually know?
It was believed. Like again, like you can't make sweeping statements. Like it was again believed again, like when he came in September 14, again like in like during the Depsang incident, it was believed that Xi Jinping did not know when he was sitting in Ahmedabad.
Like Nawaz Sharif did not know target.
No, Nawaz Sharif is not about Kargil. But that's documented. That's documented. Again, like in Pakistan's case, it comes out. It comes out. In China's case, is like you never know what's coming out is whether true or not. That way.
And one final question: what about the sort of the security establishment? There are a lot of there are these views that this government, the army, the intelligence agency, that also has to do with the structure of the fact that the NSA is also a particular breed. That this, I wouldn't call it deep state, but the security agencies basically they have more of a say, even in areas where you need a bit of nuance and diplomacy, and at times that creates some problems in terms of foreign policy. Though of course, in terms of China and the US, things happen at the highest level.
Things happen.
But on certain issues, there's a bit of a need at times when you see knee-jerk reactions and all. So do you think that actually the security, the intelligence agencies, they have more of a say, even in complex foreign policy issues as opposed to the past, or is it?
I believe it's more personality based that way.
Right.
Like for example, if you have to sort of have like if you want to see a contrast of it, then the current NSA and the previous NSA. All right. So the previous NSA, when I hear him speak in under Chatham House rules, he's very frank. See again, and then he tells like this Times Now example has been quoted by him n number of times under Chatham House rules. The former NSA Shivshankar Menon. So he was the one which brought it out under his book also. Like in his book also he's mentioned it probably that we have to sort of have a pin or somehow control the media houses in raising the specter of it, in raising the tempo. All right. And because it's personality based and because I've also been following it since the past 10 years I'm in Delhi now, that if you want to have a hardline policy towards Pakistan, like for example, what should we do of Pakistan? You are a Pakistan specialist that way. So like, what should we do of Pakistan? We have no recourse. We have tried everything. We have tried like he went for a biryani thing or he went for a wedding or gave a shawl, etc. We invited their investigation agency to Pathankot. We tried everything and then there was like, okay, nothing's working, so let's isolate them. Let's just not bother. So we are going sub-regional. So it's because the establishment as such, be it security or foreign policy or economic diplomacy part of it, everyone's sort of frustrated by not getting back what they're putting it in. So if you put in so much efforts, you want to sort of get back at least a minuscule amount of it. But for example, the current government, Imran Khan's government there, we don't know who to talk to. They say that come talk to us, etc., etc. We might go and talk, but who to talk to there and whether we will get something out of it or not. So it again stands to question that whether this establishment, current establishment, or after 2019, if someone else comes in or the establishment changes, who will come in, but the thinking remains the same. There's always continuity in foreign policy.
There is a bit of, at times there is more height because it has to do with the personality of the leader at that point in time. So what happens many a time is that, clear political messaging or communication and all, that definitely helps. But the articulation of points is much better. But at the same time, when it's very high decibel also, it does raise the pitch much more. On the other hand, when you go incrementally, it may create a lot of frustration and then maybe things, it's just bureaucratic. But at least things, the expectations don't rise suddenly. So that is one answer to, on issues like Pakistan and China, while at times it's very good, you say, just catch the bull by the horns and take a big step and all. I think what my answer to your question would be that probably at times you haven't done anything and at times you tried too hard. So for instance, you didn't speak at all and suddenly you went. Right? And then you can't say when you went in December 2015, you also have to see what does the other person have to offer you. If you cancel the talks, either the talks have been carrying on, you went to preparation, then something that happens is different. Then suddenly first you don't talk to anyone, then you call the rise, have to put on code. So that's...
No, but then there's a pro-con...
Between two extremes. So I think the approach right now, what is happening right now, if you look at the last 3-4 weeks, it's the right approach. So for instance, on water issues, you're negotiating. Behind the scenes, probably something is happening on at the SCO level, your Indian and Pakistani militaries, they're talking. So the multilateral fora and things which are outside the purview of the media, you must let that happen, because suddenly that will open up. Just going and how many problems hugs create. So suddenly you expect two leaders to hug and all that. That's very lethal.
Hug diplomacy.
When it comes to India, and when it comes to Pakistan, China, the military is actually taking a very proactive role now. Even when the whole SCO summit happened, even on the sidelines, both the Premier and the Prime Minister actually thought of setting up hotlines and having a specialized DGMO only for China and Pakistan relations. Now, even if you look at Pakistan, sir, it's the Pakistani militaries that approach that's reaching out to the military so that some sort of communication starts on a very direct level. It's not the government to government that's talking when it comes to Pakistan, even China. It's the military
that's a New York Times story. Yes, that is. But we're not. But let's not read too much into that also. See, China is fine. China is a different molecule because actually what's happening. But in this case, it could also be you see the Pakistani army also. Please notice, since you've come in, if you look at Pompeo's visit, if you look at one of the stories in the Asia Times, what is a Pakistan military official has said that Pompeo targeted the civilian leadership more. He didn't say much to us. So you've got to understand those, as he was saying, those fault lines are very much there, and don't go by what a New York Times story. Even though the Pakistan army is the main player, agreed, but whether Pakistan army has sent any overtures or whatever, it could be leak as well. The New York Times story is a bit much. SEO, you had
there's a high risk, high reward sort of a thing to your point there, like in terms of the hug diplomacy or not doing anything and putting too much at stake. So if there's a if there's a leader who can put who can present his position in a much articulate manner and has put his reputation at stake, so there's a high risk, high reward in that game there.
But then doing anything becomes tougher.
No, doing anything becomes tougher.
So much and you do whatever.
Yeah.
Then doing anything is tough. Even going back to the table is much tougher. Whereas if you go after some preparation, you go after some amount of, like for instance, what is happening over the last month, whoever is doing it. I mean, I would not go by that story, but otherwise, some overtures have been made or whatever. So that approach it still makes sense. We keep on doing something together. Let the delegations meet, discuss water issues, discuss.
No, like what happens? What happens? Away from the media glare, it's functioning smoothly, like not smoothly, but has been functioning.
After high decibel diplomacy and failure of that, even that stops. Unless it is very well prepared. Because the same predictable script that you move for 2 years.
But then that becomes a tactic. That becomes a tactic of what to sort of give concessions and get concessions.
See, for every country you can't do it. I'm not saying you do it, but you also have to move from case to case.
Case to case.
So from a hug with Obama or Trump would be more rewarding than a hug with Nawaz or Bajwa or whoever you want to have.
So my question, like you were saying that whatever is happening in the past month has been comprehensive. There's water. That my thing is, wouldn't this approach be stunted if there's any infiltration on the border? Like, okay, we're talking about the water, we're talking about the army through the summit, the SCO, then there's this whole thing of the Governmental going to Iran, etc.
That is risky.
It's very comprehensive, so that's a good way to go about it because it's comprehensive. But if there is an infiltration on the border, that's only one part of our relationship with Pakistan. The rest is economics, energy, whatever. Won't that again stunted, and then again we go back to not doing anything because we get frustrated. Because Pakistan doesn't behave. That's the
No, yes, yet.
I agree with her. It's no matter what is going on in the sites, but if something like what Hanpur had or a Orient happens again, everything will be started.
So, but you see, you haven't gone very far now. You haven't gone that far. So, with SCO, you have to meet. Multilaterals work very different. You can't see on SARC. You can say, okay, I'm going to leave my bat and ball and I'm going to talk to you. But in SCO, it doesn't function like that, right? So let's look at the areas
No,
we're engaging.
with SARC, our EAM will meet SARC foreign ministers in UN in the month end. Like she's going to United Nations in New York and she's going to meet SARC foreign ministers there. So SARC may be reviving with Pakistan now. Like we went from SARC to sub-regional like BBI and etc. Like BBI and BIMSTEC. Now it may be revived because the new government is there. Probably they'll be like, okay, we want to talk again, etc., etc., etc. The question on Pakistan doesn't behave. So academically, there's a thing called rational actor in international politics. So you have to start on that premise, whether Pakistan is a rational actor or not. So it,
Failing state.
again, no sweeping. It's a quasi-failed state, point
Failing
one. Yeah, so it's a quasi-failed state. Yeah, failing state that way. And it's a state based on ideological presumptions. Like the basis of a state is ideology. Okay, the basis of Chinese state is also ideology. Okay, but the ideology, the two-nation theory that Pakistan was based on, has gone down the drain in 71. Okay, so then whether it acts rationally or not, the Pakistan army may act rationally for its own interest, not for the Pakistani state. Like it said that Pakistan is where an army has a state, all right, and China is where a party has an army. So like the Chinese Communist Party has an army. It's a state where a political party has an army. Pakistan is where an army has a state to itself.
Sir, now same question. Now, what is the use of living in so much of ambiguity? Is because India and Pakistan have agreed to hold joint military exercises under the SCO and on a one-to-one basis also. Now, if everything's happening like an attack and everything, if something of the matter happens and it ends, then why are we still? What's the use of living in ambiguity on one side and not living in ambiguity on the side? Who's set to gain from this whole grey area? Now, on one side, the militaries don't want to talk to each other, but because of political pressure, the militaries have to engage in military exercises. What's the advantage of this? If you know that they aren't going to behave, or maybe 4-5 months down, something again is going to happen, then what's the use of living in this ambiguity?
So, India and Pakistan won't bilaterally have military exercises. It has not been mentioned anywhere. They do it under SCO.
Yes, sir,
And like he said, things function very differently under multilateral fora. So under multilateral fora, we may engage with them and have military exercises. All right, but not bilaterally. Second point, in terms of military not wanting to engage, that is not true. The military is the only actor who wants to engage in India. The establishment may not want to. The personalities hemming the establishment may not want to. The political constituency may not want to engage with Pakistan. The military is the only actor in India which wants to engage with Pakistan. And he is a Pakistan specialist, he can attest to it.
So it's very dangerous calling us a specialist on Pakistan.
No, but like you write much more on Pakistan than me that way.
Long story short,
Yeah.
you can't, think that this thing happens and you'll get. So you have to think in the long haul, basically. You have to think of 10
So
years.
that's my point, sir. But long haul, what's the point?
No, so-
long haul's been happening.
Long
for
haul, no. You see, because you or I want something to happen, it doesn't happen that way, right? Policy makers have to say who's voted them in, they have to say the whole. See, sitting here in Jindal and thinking of IR theories and all, you may think it's ambiguity.